something at 7:40, something like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to get you in to part in the conversation.
Okay.
We're gonna debate, Danielle.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll have a discussion here is what I'm looking to make happen. So hang on one second, okay? So give me a minute. There we go. I'm going to ask everybody to initially mute until after you get your introduction in, okay? Welcome to the discussion this evening on the term LatinX. I am Gilberto Pagan, Gil Pagan is what they call me. I'm a director of Hispanos Del Sur. We are a grassroots organization that serves the Latino community. We're based in North Carolina, but we serve the South. And I'll be the moderator tonight, and I will be asking questions, and I may get into the discussion myself. And the panelists that we have here cross many different spaces. We have Mark Hugo Lopez, who is Dr. Lopez. He is the Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at Pew Research Center, where he leads planning of the center's research agenda focused on chronicling the diverse, ever-changing racial and ethnic landscape of the United States. He's an expert on issues of racial and ethnic identity, Latino politics and culture, and the U.S. With the U.S. and Hispanic American populations, global and domestic immigration, and the U.S. demographic landscape. I've read some of the stuff that Mark has done and fascinating data and research. Clearly an expert in the Hispanic area and on voting and a whole bunch of stuff. So Mark, share a couple of words, 1 or 2 minutes about what you're doing there and what you're going to share with us a little bit.
Well, thank you for the great introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to our conversation. I'm going to share with you some demographic data about the nation's Hispanic population, but also some of the findings from our recent survey about 1.5 years ago, asking Latinos if they've even heard of the term Latinx. Some of the findings are really quite interesting, and I look forward to our conversation. So thank you. Thanks for the chance to be here. Excellent.
And we have Danielle Villotto, the anchor of Telemundo in Charlotte, Hispanic anchor up there, a good man, and we've had conversations in the past on various topics, and he's going to participate in the conversation and give us his viewpoints on this term. I'm looking to hear from you as well, and Daniel, tell us a little bit about you in that 1 or 2 minutes so that we can move it along.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be part of this debate today, a debate that is very healthy and we need in our community. What Latinx means, it is something that is going to be something that people will have to force the community to use, or is something that spontaneously is going to become part of the dictionary or part of our language, the way we speak here in the US, and what Latinx means. I think is fascinating. The debate is very well needed in our community, and I can't wait to just listen different points of view this afternoon, and looking forward to debate about it. So thank you so much, Gil, for making me part of this.
I'm glad you can make it here. Claudio Acevedo, he is a deacon, him and his wife. I'm not sure about his wife, but I know that he's a deacon of in Hispanic ministries at Cross Assembly, a church in Raleigh. Claudio, share a couple of words with us and bring what you're going to bring to the discussion.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all. We are very interested in serving the Hispanic community. I'm part of a local church in Raleigh, North Carolina. It happens to be one of the largest church planted here in Raleigh. We have a diverse population, but a healthy number of our members are from the Hispanic community. they are either first or second generation. And the work at the church is to embrace everyone that comes through the doors and have a plan to meet the specific cultural needs and language barriers that the various people that come through our doors have. I am honored to have a part in that work, which is done by a large number of people. I'm particularly interested in the term that we're discussing today, because I have learned to appreciate the importance of words and how words do have an impact on our behavior, and how they can be transformative and influential in ways that we cannot quite touch and grasp, but they affect us. I'm excited to hear your points of view as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Hector Vaca is a outreach training organizing director at Acción NC, Action North Carolina. It's a grassroots organization serving the Hispanic community. I think I got that right, Hector. Please share a little bit about what you're bringing to the discussion and what you'd like to learn.
So once again, Hector Vaca, the Immigrant Justice Director for Action NC. I'm also a documentary photographer on the side, going on the community. And I'm coming at this from the perspective of a community organizer and a documentary photographer, which means I get to talk to people in the community on a daily basis, meet them where they're at, hear from them their stories, their immigration stories, but also their stories of their families, how they're living during COVID-19. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of the community and talking about equity and respecting people's personal dignity, their personal right to identify the way they want to identify. The same way somebody named Daniel would say, I prefer to be called Dan versus Danny. It's about, I'm coming at it from that perspective, respecting people's dignity, talking about equity, and the people I meet in the community.
Thank you, Hector. Appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. Margarita, share a little bit about yourself. I know that Margarita is an author, a writer, a Latino writer at that. Please share a little bit there. You're on mute. You got to unmute yourself.
It always happens.
There you go.
Thank you for having me tonight once again. Thank you for meeting you all. And yes, indeed, this is a very a nice opportunity to discuss all the inclusive language and ways for the community to express themselves, to call themselves. And for us, it's a new way to learn. Yes, I'm a writer. I'm Ecuadorian, and also I'm a multiracial person. And it's very interesting for me because as a conversation we did have a couple of days ago with Danielle, some of our perspectives and ideas about the inclusive language were not on the same page, but we managed to get along and to listen one to another. So,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And we got Stephen Caban, who is a worker in the community, in the migrant community, and he works in the Head Start side of that community, working with those workers, and he's listening in right now, and he'll probably ask some questions later. So I'd like to kind of move to Dr. Lopez and kind of go through the slides. He's going to go through some data, and that's going to lay down some foundations for us to have the conversation, and then we'll go into questions and the like from there. So you need me to allow you to share?
That'd be great. Screen? Yes.
Yeah, I gotta see if I can do that. Give me a minute. Okay. See if you can see it. You can see it, Dr. Lopez.
I can. Yes.
You good? All right. Okay, go. You have the floor.
So I have a really short presentation. This is not a long presentation. I want to share some findings from some of the work of the center, not only around Latinx, but other ways in which people within this population that we're talking about and that many of us are a part of, how people identify themselves. In fact, listening to everybody's introductions really highlighted both the diversity and the many different ways that people see their identities, because it's not just one thing. It's oftentimes many different pieces of one's identity that come from the place you're from, your religion, how you see yourself in the community, how others see you. All those are things that we hear and see in our data. So let me share with you some big trends that we're seeing among Latinos that I hope will be helpful in our conversation today. The first, about the Pew Research Center, I just want to say that we are nonpartisan and non-advocacy. So we don't take any positions on policy. There might be some questions tonight about policy, and you may find me saying, I don't know, but here's what our data has to say. So just as a side note. So when we talk about the population of people that we refer to as Hispanics or Latinos, this is a population that numbers about 61 million people. That's a number that's been rising sharply since the 1970s. And in fact, you can see that the number of Latinos living in the country has grown from 10 million then to about 61 million now. We're in August going to get the data from the 2020 census and the count from the 2020 census. That will be really helpful in understanding not only the national number of Hispanics living in the country as counted in the 2020 census, but also differences by state. But this name and this term and this number encompasses people of many different backgrounds and many different identities. And in fact, it's oftentimes, some might say this characterizes the population as sort of a single population, when really it's not a monolith, but rather a diverse population in many different respects. So for example, when we talk about the nation's Latino population, one of the questions I oftentimes get is people want to talk about their origins, where their families are from. And when you take a look at the national portrait of Latinos in the United States, at 61 million people, they trace the roots to all the countries of Latin America and also to Spain and to Europe, and even some who will say that they're Latino and will trace their roots to the Philippines. So there's quite a variety of backgrounds within this population. Here are the largest groups, though. Mexicans make up the single largest group with about 37 million people and about 62% of the national population, followed by Puerto Ricans at about 10%, Cubans and Salvadorans at about 4% each, Dominicans at 3.4%, and then Guatemalans, Colombians, and Hondurans all have at least 1 million people who self-identify as part of those groups. And by the way, this includes people born in those countries and their US-born children and grandchildren who are living here in the United States. So this is people who are from that country, but also identify or trace their roots to that origin. And I think, again, this is really important to note how diverse this population is. And this doesn't even touch on every possible way in which this population might identify itself. Now, in the work that we've done at the center, we have focused on how people choose to most often describe their identity. And this is work that we did back in 2015. So this is before LatinX really took off. And we asked questions about whether or not people most often describe themselves by their country of origin or heritage identity, by Hispanic or Latino, which are pan-ethnic terms, or American. And what we found is that for among US adult Latinos, about half will say it's their country of origin term that they use most often to describe themselves, followed by, or just an equal share, is both American and Hispanic or Latino. But notice how it changes across the generations. And here's yet another way in which this population is diverse. Not everybody's an immigrant. Not everybody's the children of immigrant parents. There's a lot of variety in the immigrant generations or the distance from their immigrant roots that many Latinos have. In fact, some trace their roots to some of the original settler families of the Spanish in New Mexico, for example. But when you take a look at identity across these, across immigrant generations along these three lines, you'll find immigrants, the foreign-born, are more likely than, say, any other generation to choose their country of origin term as a way to describe themselves. I don't think that's a surprise. I think that reflects where people are from and the identities that are tied to Mexico or Cuba or the Dominican Republic. But when you start to look at the generations, you see a different pattern. Among those who are the US-born children of immigrant parents, the second generation, things are somewhat more split. About a third say that they use their country of origin term of their families most often. Another third say they're American most often. And then about a quarter say that they're Hispanic or Latino most often when it comes to their identity. What about the third and higher generation? This is US-born people of US-born parents. And you can see that among them, half say that they most often refer to themselves as American. A quarter use their country of origin term of their families, and 14% say that they use these pan-ethnic terms, Hispanic or Latino. This is a pattern that we've been observing at the Pew Research Center for about 20 years now when it comes to asking about the terms that Latinos use to describe their identity. But in recent years, a new term has emerged, LatinX, one that is meant to be a pan-ethnic term to describe this population. It's also meant to be a gender-neutral term. And just a little bit about the history of Latinx. So Latinx is not so new that it hasn't been around for a while. It's actually been around since the 1990s. And it was introduced in academia, universities, as a pan-ethnic term meant to capture all the stories of the population of people who trace their roots to Latin America. And so it was a competitor to Hispanic and a competitor to Latino, but also meant to be gender neutral. So just like the alternatives Latina/O or Latin with an @ sign to represent the shared stories of Hispanics, both men and women, and to recognize that. Latinx was designed to be inclusive and recognize the multitude of stories that are represented within this population. So the term has been around since the 1990s. We started to see Google searches for it rise around the time of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando back in 2014, 2015, 16. And since then, it's been rising in use, particularly among the news media, among corporations, celebrities use it a lot. And we also see it continuing to be used a lot among universities. So that led us at the Pew Research Center to ask in a survey whether or not Latinos have even heard of the term. So are they aware of the term?
Yeah.
And here's what we found. In a survey we did in December of 2019, we asked the Latino public a very straightforward question. Have you ever heard of the term Latinx or not? And we found 76% have actually not heard of the term. So this is among adults living in the United States who self-identify as part of this population of people who trace their roots to Latin America. And among those who had heard of the term, relatively few actually use it. So about a quarter have heard of the term, and in total, across all Latino adults, just 3% use the term to describe their own identity. Now, this is an interesting set of findings. There's no judgment here. We didn't ask people, do you like Latinx or not? That's not what this is about. This is just a question of, have you heard of it and do you use it?
Hey, Mark, can I interject here? I love what you're saying, and I want to be able to kind of bring people in to the conversation about this particular slide. You can go to the next slide. I want to pull in Daniel and ask a question about that. Was it 3% of the people heard of Latinx? No one else, I guess. So the other 97% am I?
It's 23% have heard of it, but 76 haven't. But in total, just 3% actually use it. Yeah.
Right. So 70% have not heard of it, and the term now is being used, from what I understand and from what I hear in the media, Spanish media, English media, newspapers, radio, TV. And they're using this term, and meanwhile, 76% of the population have not heard of this term. So I guess my Daniel, being the Senor Villotto, being a news person, why would I ask the question? Why would this term is being used when 76% of the people don't even know what it is? So I mean, can you shed some light on that? You know, based on your experience, what your thoughts are?
Yes, absolutely. And well, I think, first of all, we have to look at the language we speak, the Spanish we speak, or the Spanglish we speak in the United States. And I was talking with Hector earlier, and we were addressing this issue. And I said, okay, now we are 61 million. We just heard this number, this incredible number, 61 million of Latinos or Hispanic living in the United States. What are we going to do with that? Most of the people speak Spanish, and is part of a new, I would say, new reality, a new culture. Is Spanish and English is the clash of two cultures in this country, and both languages, Spanish and English, are alive. So we have to look at the context. Latinx is a term that is becoming trending, especially in new generations, because they feel more identified with that term. We heard a few minutes ago, Hector, Mark, when you said ethnic, it can be an ethnic term or a neutral term. Whatever it is something new, and it's something that is reflecting the new reality the new generations are living in the United States. It's a very fascinating thing. Now, you asked me as a journalist if I will use it, Latinx. Yes, of course, why not? why not? If it's becoming a word that is identifying a lot of people that eventually can watch me on TV and talking to them, and I can relate to them using the term Latinx, and they feel more connected with my message or what I'm saying in the newscast, then yes, why not? I think we have to be open-minded regardless how many people are used or have been using the term or know what Latinx is all about, because it's part of that language that is surfacing in the United States with so many Latinos living here, new generations that are born in the United States. So yes, I don't have any problem with it. And I think that we should be pretty much open-minded to use that term without any concern that we are violating any linguistic rules in both sides, English or Spanish. I'm very open about it and very comfortable, by the way.
No, that's fine. We appreciate you sharing that. Mark, the term, and I want to pull some other people in here, so I'm going to ask you some questions. The term originated, let's say in the 90s, you said at the university level. So it was created more than likely by somebody in the elite towers, these are my words, the university system, more than likely not a Latino, more than likely, not Black, more than likely they were probably Anglo. Okay, I'm just making an assumption, don't have the proof of that, but so they came up with this term. And the term, please correct me if I'm wrong, the term was originated to include a certain group of people that felt excluded from, I guess, the Latino and Latina, I guess the LGBTQ community. That term was created to include them. Am I accurate there or am I wrong?
Yeah, that's right. It's meant to be a gender neutral term to be inclusive of all the stories of the people who make up this population. So men, women, and people who may see their gender identity in a different way. And so it was created to identify not only the population, but to have a label that is inclusive for studies programs, like a Latinx studies program or a Latina/O studies program. In the 90s, there was a broad movement at the university level, not only among Latino studies programs or Hispanic studies programs, but others as well, to be sure that the stories of all groups, men, women, and anybody, no matter their gender or background, were included and they felt welcome as part of that. So yes, this is a term that's meant to be inclusive, but to describe not just people who are LGBT or might have a gender identity that is not male nor female, but instead meant to include everybody in a way that, say, Hispanic or Latino might not. And that's what the term was created for. Can I say something about something that Daniel said, which I think is really interesting and important to note? The use of the term and awareness of the term is greatest among younger Latinos. You ask young Latinos ages 18 to 29, you'll find that about half have heard of the term, for example, whereas those 65 and older, much less likely. Right. Also, those who are English speakers and US born and have gone to college or who are Democrats tend to be more likely to say they've heard of the term than, say, those who are foreign-born Spanish speakers and Republicans. But it is interesting that there are some patterns of at least awareness that we see within the data. And I would add to Daniela's comment about the US is changing and language is changing. This is not just a movement within the US or within just the Latino population, but the nation's young people are asking questions about how we label ourselves, what language terms we use to describe our identities. So the movement of gender pronouns, for example, is part of that. And around the world, there are other movements in other languages to have gender neutral language. In India, you see this, so you see it in Germany. And of course, you see it in Latin America with Latina being the alternative to Latinx, which is perhaps more of a US centric term. But no matter what, we are seeing movements around the world to have more gender inclusive language. And Latinx may succeed, may not succeed, I don't know, but it is one of the terms that is part of that movement.
Yeah, and I would like to add something, if you allow me real quick. And we mentioned Latin. Spanish is based in Latin. It's the foundation of our language. Do we speak Latin? No, we don't speak Latin. Actually, if I have to read Latin, I won't understand 99% of it. I won't get it. But with Spanish in the United States is happening the same thing. One day we are going to mention Spanish and English, both languages, that created something new, something different, something too original, from the United States, because what is happening here with the Spanish and the Spanish population and the combination of those languages is unique to the United States and to the United States Hispanic population. So who knows what language we are going to be speaking 100 years from now. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here to see it or to speak it, but nobody can predict that.
Sure. I mean, I'd like to respond to a few things that Mr. Viotto brought up. I thought were very interesting.
Go ahead.
May I?
Go ahead, Claudio.
So one of the things that Mr. Viotto said, he said, I do not have any issues using a new term, Latinx, in this case, because it helps me relate to people. But when relating to people and being accepted and reaching more and more people, it's not the main goal, then you do have to ask yourself, is this good for the people? There's a lot of new things going on in our nation today that are really bad for everybody. I think this term, it's like he said in the beginning, we are finding ourselves forced to use a lot of new terms to accommodate a small section of our society. The issue is not the word at hand. There's a lot of new words that are being adopted, a lot of new words that serve a function. But this particular word, what it intends to do is to debunk the concept that, leaving language aside, because there is a specific word, Latino is a word, Latina is a word, Latinx is not a word in the Spanish language, and it's not a word in the English language yet. However, it can be used. That I will never oppose someone, say a non-binary, self-described non-binary person, that they want to be referred to as Latinx. But the point is that all Latinos and that want to be accepted, especially the young people, are now going to be invited to describe themselves as Latinx, removing this important concept that Latino is sufficient to describe the general population. And it has a big effect on what the younger people are listening to, because then they will pick up, the young people, I have 2 children, they're small, they will pick up on what this means. This means is we, the adults, are telling you that there is no Latino or Latina, you get to decide. And I think that's where it begins to become a serious threat.
Well, in response, respectfully, no one is forcing anybody to use this language. So I would like to correct that. That is not a word that's being forced on people. It's about the dignity of the person. As you mentioned before, you talk to people. We all talk to people on a daily basis. And it's about asking them how they would like to identify. Like if somebody were to ask me how I would like to identify, I myself would choose Latino because I am male and I'm a cisgender male. I was born male and I identify as male. But I also identify as Puerto Rican. I also identify as Ecuadorian. I identify as a US citizen. So if somebody asks me how I would like to identify, I tell them what my pronouns are and who I am, and tell them who I am, how I identify. In terms of the word not being in the dictionary, actually it is in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. So in English, it is in the dictionary. It is in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it describes exactly what it is, and it talks a little bit about the history of the word. And the truth of the matter is, it's a living language. Spanish is a living language that, like all languages, it evolves. We don't talk like Christopher Columbus anymore. We don't talk like Bartolomé de las Casas. There was a time that water was feminine. We called it la agua. Now we call it el agua. So it's about the dignity of the person, how they would like to identify. And Latino is not inclusive because if somebody doesn't identify as male or female, then we're forcing on them to use the word, the male word, because sadly, Spanish, like many other languages, is based in patriarchy. It's a patriarchal language that itself forces on a population the use of the male pronoun when identifying a collective of people, whether they include male or female. So the language itself is imposing. So by using the word Latinx in words that are identified with it or that are used like it, we're allowing the individual to choose who they are, who they would like to identify as, and we are respecting their dignity and who they would like to identify as themselves. So, and as Mark mentioned before, in Latin America, they use Latine. So it's not strictly a US thing. They use Latine and we use Latinx here.
I would
Daniel?
like to,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Daniel, do you want to, hang
Yes.
on. You can
Yes,
say real quick and then Margarita jump in.
Yeah, something real, Margarita, before you address the panel. We mentioned that we are trying to impose a word, Latinx, and I think that we have to look at it about how we are referring to Latinos or Hispanic. My question is, native population from all over the continent, from Alaska to South America, that they have no connection to the Latino root, the colonialism from Spain, and they are called Latinos. Somebody from Oaxaca, why somebody from Oaxaca has to be called Latino or Hispanic? Or somebody with African-American descent, is an African-American descendant with roots from Africa, why is called Latino or Hispanic? So if we are thinking that Latinx is a word that we or somebody is forcing to use, then we should understand that we are already using the word Latino and Hispanic, and we are forcing people all over across the continent to be identified with these two words, whether they have or not any Latino or Hispanic connection other than just the language.
If I may, I will definitely agree with you. Please,
Claudio,
Margarita, go. I think
yeah,
I
let Margarita
skipped my
get
turn.
in. Go ahead.
thank you, Claudio and Mark. And Danielle, I have a couple of things that before I forget, because of the conversations and the opinions that you were providing. Yes, of course, Latinx, it's a new term. Well, new term that we are using the past couple of years, let's say a decade, because we are not using Latinx, or we were not using the term before, because as you said, Mark, one of the 4 American adults or adults in general didn't know the term. Okay, and 3% of that population, we didn't even use it. And as I was writing on the chat, I realized that the Latinx term was effective in our language on a daily basis was when the Orlando shooting happened. I didn't know. So I asked my daughter, who was a student at UNCC, and she explained it to me what Latinx was, because we were referring within the society ourselves, either are Hispanic or Latinos or Latinas. But mainly, if you want to refer a Latino community where we live, we erase completely the other races within the Latin American, as an indigenous, as Daniel was saying, or the African American born in South America or in a Hispanic country. I think this term produces sometimes confusion because you were saying, once again, 1 of 4 Americans didn't use it. Someone else was telling that Spanish is not inclusive. I'm a writer, and probably I'm an old-fashioned person, and I agree with you. In some terms in our language are not inclusive. They are mainly used in a masculine way, and that's the way have been for years. But my point is, Latinx, it's mostly, and I asked my 12-year-old for this panel if she has defined herself as Latinx, and she told me, I don't know the term. What is Latinx? She's 12 and she goes to a school which is a multicultural school, a magnet school within a diversity. So she went to school and she asked a couple of friends from different languages, immersion languages, and they told, we don't know. Four of them told them from 10, 12 years old told them, if 12 years old told her, I don't know what the Latinx is. But the others told them, okay, I refer myself as a Latinx because I'm from a descendant Latino or Hispanic. So you see that this term, I really, it doesn't matter if I use it or not. I rather not because it's confusing. But if you are from a community, let's say the LGBTQ, and you want me refer you as a Latinx, I will do it no matter what, because it's showing respect. But to be honest with you, it's a term that produces confusion because we normally refer ourselves to the origin. It means the country we're coming from, or to Hispanic or Latino, Latina. So someone else was referring that we use in Latin America the term Latine. I never heard of it. Still, in Ecuador we don't use it. We either talk about Latinas. We don't use it Latinos. We use it South American. You see, it's and I know Spanish and all the languages are evolving, but I think mainly this Latinx term here in the States is causing confusion within the youngest, because either they use it because they are from descendant of Hispanic parents, or either because they are referring ourselves by gender.
I don't think this is causing confusion. It's just that a lot of us are behind on the agenda. It is specifically designed to tell the general community that the only loving, compassionate way to address a vast country and to address a specific ethnic group, which is the Latinos or Latinas, the only way to do it right is to adopt this new term that it is a just a construction of the LGBT community. I think that we should focus into how to avoid the catastrophes that we're seeing around prejudice, abuse, violence. What happened in Florida in 2016 was inadmissible. But now we're teaching our young people that there is no male nor female, that you get to decide that. In our language, we start instructing that indirectly from a very early point in their lives. They will not know who they are. They won't, if you don't know who you are, you don't appreciate what makes you different. You will not be able to respect the other person's differences. I do want to respond to Hector. Hector made a very good point. He said, Claudio, no one is forcing anyone. But the interesting element of this conversation is that it doesn't seem forced until it's too late. I can no longer take comfort in the fact that when I go to sip a fancy cup of coffee in one of my favorite stores, my wife will not have the ability to visit a restroom that's not visited by other men. I used to be so happy because she'll never have to deal with the mess we deal with. When I go to those restaurants, it does not matter where I go, and those are some of the best kept restrooms ever. It's a mess because men, we just don't get it right. We just don't have we haven't developed the ability to point right and be where we need to. She doesn't get the chance now, and it's too late. is forced on her. She will have to be where I pee. And every other woman that walks into that bathroom will have to be where I pee. And I'm telling you, you ladies are losing out big time.
I would
I
argue
can't
that
edit that
the
out.
opposite is true in terms of prejudice. The thing is, first off, we need to address the misunderstanding of the use of Latino, Latina, Latinx. No one is saying that erase the words Latino and Latina or the masculine and the feminine. And I'm mostly addressing what Margarita was saying earlier. No one's actually talking about that. It's Latinx is to be a third term for those who don't identify as either one of them. And it's up to the individual to say, I prefer to identify as this because I myself am not male or I myself am not female. So it's about the individual deciding what their pronoun is.
Mm-hmm.
And just because a language is changing does not mean that the rules of the bathroom are changing. It just means that society itself is changing and the way we look at things is changing, because the truth of the matter is this: having gendered bathrooms, that's more of a new world thing. And when I say new world, I mean Western Hemisphere, because I've traveled around Europe for my work and they have bathrooms that are gender neutral and no one has issues with that, but that's also based on their culture. So we're basing our own culture in the US and in Latin America, and there's nothing wrong with having a culture. What's happening is just that things are changing, the people's perspectives on things are changing.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, as I said earlier, we don't speak like Christopher Columbus anymore. Then again, no one spoke like Christopher Columbus because he spoke a combination of Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish. But like Bartolomé de las Casas or any of those other people, and the Spanish Academy, their attack on the word, on the changing of language. My perspective on this is older people who are traditionalists who refuse to see a change in the language. That's who the Spanish Academy is. But in Spanish, we use words like alfombra. We use almohada. And that's from our roots in the Arabic culture that came into our Spanish. So language evolves. Should we go back to the language before the Moors? And should we in Latin America start using the language they use in Spain or before the Moors? Or do we accept that it changed? Should we stop using the indigenous words that we learned from our indigenous counterparts in the US, in the Latin America? Should we stop using the African words like us Puerto Ricans use fulano, mengano? We use words like that, tomate, or as it comes from Mexico, jitomate. Should we stop using those words because they're not real Spanish? So that's my defense of it.
No, I appreciate it. I wanna pull Mark in here again, and I want to recircle on some of the things that everyone has shared. One is that going back to the origination of the original term, that it was formed for inclusiveness of a certain group of people, and that now, and I think Hector had shared that now and you had shared, Mark, I believe it includes more people. The term has gotten expanded, but the original creation of the term was to address the exclusion of the LGBTQ community. So the genesis and foundation of the term LatinX was to include the LGBT community, and now it's expanded, right? And it's being used for everybody, and in the media in particular, and newspapers and radios, they're using the term Latinx to describe everybody. So there are people that do not identify with those terms, meaning that population, that subculture. And Daniel has shared that there's 60 million Hispanics in the US, right? So out of those 60 million Hispanics, it's estimated from Statista.com that about 18 million people of the 60 million, of the 330 million, I'm sorry, 330 million people in the US, 18 million are a part of the LGBTQ community. That's the numbers that have been thrown out. In the Latino population, there's 60 million people. Of that, 2.3% identify as LGBTQ, and that's 1.3 million people. Of that, 360,000 of 1.3 million identify as trans. So we are using this term that originated to include a subculture group, and we're placing that Latinx term across 60 million Hispanics, and it's being I'm using this word, it's being parroted, it's being multiplied by the media, radio, and newspapers when the vast majority of people do not associate with that culture, do not associate with that gender lifestyle. So my question to the panel, and I correct me if I was wrong, Mark, on any of the data, please do. The question to the panel, is it equitable for this term to be used across all media channels and institutions and universities and jobs and employers across all Hispanics? Is it equitable for a small group of the population that represents that subculture? Is that equitable to the Hispanic population? I present that question to the panel.
I don't think it is. I'm sorry to jump in, but I don't think it is equitable. That's my point of view. And once again, I do respect every opinion about it. I think Mark was saying before that Latinx includes everybody, but who is as that everybody? Once again, we come back. I come back to the question: if we include everybody, the races within the Latino in Mexico, or the indigenous in Mexico, or the African American in Ecuador, how the Latine or the Latinx include them? They don't feel inclusive.
So,
Yes.
so just to be clear, I'm sorry, Daniel.
Go ahead, Mark. I want you to speak. Go ahead.
Just to be clear about the terms Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx, they're all pan-ethnic terms meant to describe people who trace their roots to Latin America, and sometimes it includes Spain and Portugal. But it is meant to be a pan-ethnic label. Now, one of the things that I've seen been happening is that you see many news media organizations, for example, in their headlines will say Latinx people or Latinx people in my blah, blah, blah are doing this, or something has happened to the group. So Latinx is in many ways starting to replace Hispanic and Latino in some cases to describe this broad population. Exactly. But as I was saying earlier, the term emerged as a way to be inclusive of the experiences of everybody within this population, men, women, and people who are non-binary. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind, and that's a place where the country is going. In terms of how this term gets applied, used, etc., I think it remains to be seen if the term is going to actually catch on. I think that other terms are going to emerge in the next few years that might eventually just surpass and supplant Latinx and Hispanic and Latino. But I think that we'll have to see where we go. Final piece that I want to add is that we did a look at Twitter to see how congressional representatives actually, which terms do they use, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and how do they actually engage the public on this? Interestingly, people who mention Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx kind of do so in equal ways. So you find that no one term dominates in the Twitter sphere among congressional representatives, but they're trying to be respectful of people's many different choices and backgrounds about the terms they'll use to describe themselves.
Meanwhile, they get other people upset by using it.
My point is, like, we here in the States have been, as a Latinos, have been quote unquote forced to identify ourselves as Hispanic or as the Latinos once again. But still, people don't know what's the difference between Hispanic, Latino, and now we add a new term that we are discussing as a Latinx. So we need to find a way, because I will now, with all the opinions, especially with the information that you are providing, Mark, I will call myself a Latinx based on first my origin, second, first my origin, second, I'm a 50% Lebanese, Syrian Lebanese, and the other 50% is divided in French, Spaniard, and Portuguese. So I will call myself a Latinx instead of being either Hispanic, Latina, or Ecuadorian.
To Hector, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, I think that couching it in terms of saying that this word is used for a subculture does a disservice to the discussion, because it's not just about the LGBTQ community. I know many feminists who prefer this word also because it changes the way we look at the language, because when you have two people of the same gender, two friends, one is female, one is female, one is male, one's female, we automatically use the male word for amigo. We use the male word for friend. So many feminists that I know prefer this word because it takes away that patriarchal view of the language. It takes away that male dominated view of the language and talks about how everybody is equal. So there's that. And Margarita, I see your point about how you are different ethnicities and it's hard to determine which is your ethnicity, which is why I developed my own word for me. I'm Ecuadorian. I'm Ecuadorian, Puerto Rican. I'm Ecuadorian, Puerto Rican, and New Yorker. I'm Ecuadorian. But in other words, from that, I can see the perspective of why this language is used, but we cannot continue to couch this in terms of just the LGBTQ community, because it's about the evolution of language and it's about feminism as well. Whether somebody agrees whether the word is feminist or not, many feminists do see it that way. So it's about being inclusive. It's about respecting the dignity of the person. And it is about equity, because different ethnicities are treated differently. Different genders or gender identifications are treated differently. So it's about giving everybody the opportunity to choose who they are, how they identify, versus having others tell you who you are. The way that you're reacting to the word Latinx sounds to me like you're also saying, how dare you tell me how I should identify myself? And you're absolutely right to feel that way. Same way for those people. We cannot tell them how to identify themselves. It's about the individual deciding who they are.
It's
Right.
just mainly a choice. That's
Yeah.
it. I think if
Exactly.
Stephen would want to interact, he was writing on the chat. He wanted to have the next.
Who's that?
Stephen?
Steven. Oh, hang on one second. He fell off. Danielle, you want to jump in real quick?
Yes, I want to see I'm going to say something real quick.
Right.
At here actually, because I have to leave in few minutes.
Okay.
The language is the way we look at the world, the way we interpret what we see around us. That's what a language. That's the purpose of a language, is to communicate how we see the world. You were mentioning, Gil, about the subculture LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community as a subculture. Please, we have to remember that they are not a subculture. That group of people have been discriminated. There are high rates of homicide in the gay community, the LGBT community, because of discrimination, because they are forced to leave the house if they come out and they tell their parents at an early age, because they're bullied in schools, because there is a reality that is very, very, very hard for them to understand and comprehend since very early age. So if we are going to think that Latinx is a word that is referring only to a certain group of people that have been going through a lot forever, and by the way, let me add, the Latino culture is a very homophobic culture. We have a tendency to have a very, very hard point of view about the gay community. So, and that is in history, okay? The new generations, they see the world from a different perspective. They do not, fortunately, they are not carrying on that luggage of discriminating other people for their sexual preference or who they love to. So the new generations, if they feel comfortable with the word Latinx because they see the world different than older generations, then bring it on. Why not? That's my own.
I like to say why not, because it isn't good. We seem to just accept change. Change is inevitable, but we seem to simply accept it because we know it's going to happen. I don't think this term is going to stick around. I think this is going to be gone. The next phase of our narrative is going to change. This will be gone. However, the question is it a good change? Is this positive? Is it going to help? The violence, the atrocities going on, the discrimination, the homophobia going on. I do believe that a stern posture for male and female ideology can be related here in this current state of events as homophobia. We're easy to call any clear position on either side of the issue as the extreme. I can be in a lot of groups where I'm friends with people where they will call me, they will be ready to call me a homophobic because I am saying, I believe that there is male and female. I believe there is freedom to make your own choices. I believe we must respect each other's dignity. We are created in the image of God. Every one of us, every one of the LGBT community is created in the image of God, and they must be respected and cared for in the same way that I would like any of my children to be cared for. But the question is LatinX good for them or us or everybody or anybody? It's not just let's accept change because it's here. Is it good? I think that's what we need to be asking ourselves. It's true we're not speaking the language that was taught, well, the language that was spoken 200 years ago, but there's a lot of things that are being done now that I wish we didn't do, that I wish we went back 200 years ago in some elements of our society.
I agree with Claudio.
One last comment. I realized there's some great points I want to hear from you guys. And then he left me. He'll come back to me.
Stephen, go ahead, Stephen. You wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, so based on Mark's PowerPoint presentation, right, I saw a couple things that kind of hit me, which were kind of contrary to the Latinx term. First of all, it came from the university. These great scholars who have nothing more to do than try to find out how we need to relate to each other instead of us as a group relating to each other as we have. These scholars from universities have to come up with these ideas, and they always have an idea and they always have an agenda behind it. So it is mostly this Latinx, as Gilbert, you have mentioned, all that is about inclusivity, right? Quote unquote inclusivity, but it is mostly about gender neutrality, meaning adding these other individuals, right? The LGBT community. So it's more about the gender neutrality than rather monolithic of a Latino background. Because Latino, and again, based on the Spanish language, the Spanish language, right? Latino is the term used for this, that is monolithic. It encompasses and covers everyone. So as we can see, also within that PowerPoint, by the third generation, they're not even calling themselves Latinos, they're calling themselves Americans. So why even change the term Latino, which encompasses everyone, and growing up children that do not even see themselves as that, they see themselves as American. Mm-hmm. So when you continue pushing this, and when we're talking about when we're looking at what's Claudio speaking about, right? Mm-hmm. I agree with him in a lot of sense. So because when we're looking at the continued use of this, and it's amazing because it's not like, oh, Latinx, and then all of a sudden, oh, we don't like that term, and they say, oh, okay. No, they continue pushing it and pushing it. Why? Because there's an agenda, and you see this agenda around. You see it everywhere, right? And they quote unquote say about equity, they quote unquote say it's about, but it's a bigger agenda, and we have to look at that agenda that came with Mao, that agenda that came with Marxism, that agenda that came with all these things based on divisiveness. Now, I can go into that more, but obviously this is more, we're kind of keeping it a little light about the term itself, right? But so why are we looking, or why are these individuals looking to harm the Spanish language and grammar, because the grammar, right, is masculine or feminine tense, and they're part of the Spanish language. So it is what is taught in our schools and what we have lived with as a romantic language. So the word Latino is an inclusive term, collective to those who are a people. I mean, we grow up listening, dancing, and becoming emotional to songs and music with this term, Latino. And you know, I'm sure you've all heard it. Dicen que somos Latinos. Dicen que somos Latinos. And in the clubs, Latinos. You know, I mean, they didn't go and say Latinos, solo los hombres. Solo los hombres. ¿Qué hacen esas mujeres? No, párenos marica. No, they don't do that. They don't. It's Latinos. It's all of us, right? So we grow up listening to this music, which the term is endearing to us. So it's not just, again, a word to identify or describe an individual on an application form. Latino is our term that makes us feel good and also unites us. I mean, no matter our color, no matter our religion, or no matter our sex. Now, a few woke individuals want to use the term Latinx, and if they want to use it on their own, but the problem is that they're pushing it, claiming it as it being inclusive, but we already have this term, again, Latino, which is inclusive. Ironically, Latinx has turned to be divisive, as you hear right now, witnessing in this meeting, and more so in its intentions to bring to the forefront the reminder that we are not the same. I mean,
with you,
in the
Steve.
clubs, when they say Latinos, all the Latinos go ahead. Now, when they say Latinx, oh, I gotta remember that there's a gay person over there, or that there's a woman over there, or that there's this person over there, or this person might sort of be Latino, but they're not. The background is not really Latino. You know, I mean, it's so divisive, incredibly divisive.
Yes.
Mark,
I'm not particularly.
When I grew up, when I met my wife at college, and I went to her room, she had a big sign. And she's from Central America, and I'm from Puerto Rico. And, you know, because we're coming from different places and all that, and I grew up differently and all that, I always said Puerto Rican, I'm Puerto Rican, right? But then I saw her, and when she had that posted, that was Latinos, that was including her Salvadorian friend, and me, and everyone else that is Latino. So you know, this term here, Latinx, has served to be more divisive, and it's divisive for a purpose. And again, I mentioned that purpose, but we cannot go. I'm not going to go into that. You know, but further, if we're looking to be so inclusive of individuals and being so sensitive about the community as a whole, especially all the Latinos coming from other countries right now, migrating, right? Immigrants. Many Latino migrant workers, legal or illegal, come to this country with little resources or guidance to navigate a way of life here. And although they may find themselves surrounded with individuals just like themselves, you know, so they're all working in the fields or whatever, many times they might feel isolated. However, one thing they maintain, one thing they can count on as a group or as individuals, is their identity as Latino.
Yes.
Okay.
And
so
now a few people in this country who have little relation or connection to these immigrants' experience and hardships and morals or religious beliefs and personal identity want to go ahead and impose on them a label with which they themselves do not identify with.
Yeah.
So I come here, I'm an immigrant, a migrant worker, and Latino is a term they say Latinx is a term that they say that they need to use. Right. But Latino is a term that unifies these migrant workers, not only with their colleagues from other Latino nations, but with the rest of the Latino community, such as myself.
Gotcha.
When I go to purchase something and all that, and you know, I'm fairly white, I'm light skinned and all that, and sometimes I get surprised. It's funny because Americans kind of get surprised that I speak English technically so well, and then Latinos are surprised that I speak Spanish. So I'm in the middle here. But you know, the thing is, it makes us connect. We go ahead and say Latino, and it's always been like that. I don't see a reason for a term to come up with a new term to quote unquote be inclusive of other people when we've already been inclusive of them, and now this becomes exclusive. This is divisive. This is a divisive term. It is a connection that so Latino is a connection that transcends social class and borders. It does. Borders are no match for the term Latino. Like I said, my wife from Bolivia, my friend, her roommate who was from El Salvador, me from Puerto Rico. I mean, and another person from all these people without any borders. We were Latinos.
Steve,
this is who
Steve.
Migrant workers identify, and us, we identify themselves as, and I mean, I guess again, as a collective, Latinos is the proper term.
It's possible
Steve,
that
I don't see why,
move,
except for the.
You guys there?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. I want to move along on the conversation. Thanks, Steve, for sharing.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear us? Thanks, Steve, for sharing.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Steve? Okay, so thanks for sharing. I wanted to move the conversation along, and Mark has one more slide. I want to see that the third one brought up a lot of conversation. What the fourth one looks like.
Could I comment something important? I think we should not skip. I know that Stephen did not mean this. I think in the context of what he was saying, he used the word, a word to describe the LGBT community or gay people. That is commonly used. It has been used in Caribbean countries. I think it's an unacceptable word. I know that he did not mean it.
I agree.
This is, and
part of
that
his
comment
vocabulary.
aside, it's important. This is not a defense on the Latino word. The Latino word can go anyway.
Right.
I'm not attached to it. This is a conversation, in my opinion, about is LatinX of any benefit to anyone, any section of this society?
Yeah.
Can I respond really quickly if I keep it short?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'll try to keep it short. So it always concerns me when I hear people compare any change to socialism it's almost like we're bringing back McCarthyism. If it's change, if it's about inclusion, we automatically label it something that many people consider a negative. And it always concerns me to hear that kind of language. It to me is reminiscent of McCarthyism and reminiscent of Nazi Germany, stamping out differences just because we don't feel like it. And usually the conservative method of debating, where you take over a conversation and make it so long that nobody else gets a word in, it's also very concerning because it doesn't leave time for dialogue and a way to discuss these things. So those are the kinds of things that concern me. Because the truth of the matter is this: it's about inclusion, and I'm having trouble understanding why being inclusive, loving thy neighbor, and treating thy neighbor with dignity and respect is a negative. And that always concerns me when people couch inclusivity, couch caring about your neighbors, caring about the dignity of those around us as a negative. That always concerns me, when we should be there for each other and defending each other and talking about how we can best serve our community, how we can best serve our neighbor and those that we love, because language evolves. And I'll leave it there. Language evolves. We don't talk the way we used to. Language changes.
I got you. No, that's fine. I could rebut what you just said about the liberals and conservative conversation here. And this is not going to be a political discussion, but I'm not going to go there, Hector. But you went there, but I'm not going to go there. Maybe offline we'll have the conversation. Mark, please share your last slide, please, because I want to see what this brings us up. What this brings up next.
Well, I think this one does summarize some of the conversation that we've been having tonight, because it shows a result from our survey where we asked respondents to, and this is a survey of Hispanic adults. So keep in mind, these results are only for Latino adults. But we asked people about which term they think which term they prefer to describe the Hispanic or Latino population overall. And this finding is something we've seen for many decades, so this is not new, but most prefer Hispanic. So 61% of all Latino adults tell us that Hispanic is the term that they prefer to describe the Hispanic or Latino population overall. 29% say Latino, 4% say Latinx, and 5% say something else. But again, this is what the public has said. This is what the public has been saying for some time. And I think one of the most important things here is to think about these three terms as terms that people can choose in how they want to describe themselves and how they want to describe the population. And in fact, I think something that that we've been talking about here about sort of how does this happen, and particularly what Hector had to say, which is that it's about what people want to tell you. And in the work that I do and the way that I do the work at the center, when it comes to identity, I try to let people tell me how they see their identity, and they'll come around to it at some point to tell me what terms they prefer, or if they prefer anything at all. And interestingly, not everybody who's of Hispanic or Latino background even wants to be called by their country of origin terms. They want to be called something else. So again, it's all about how people might self-identify, and that's what we as survey researchers try to do here. But I think these results nonetheless are interesting. Hispanic is preferred 2-to-1 over Latino, and Latinx is very, very far behind. But this could change as new terms emerge, as the consciousness of the country changes, and as the public begins to discuss what they want themselves to be called. So we'll see where things go, but this is from our most recent survey. I thought you might find it interesting. Thank you for letting me share it.
No, thank you for getting that last slide in and kind of summarize a little bit about the term. And seems that Hispanic seems to be the most popular term still to be used, and Latinx, again, based on your research, is not used a lot. And one of the things that I didn't get a chance to share when the conversation was running about the term Latinx is not being pushed upon us, and that people can self-identify as Latinx or not, or accept the term or not. But I feel that when you look at social media and all the news outlets, they're using that term and they control the narrative. And that term is going out. Now everybody starts to use that term. So in theory, it is being pushed upon the population as a whole. Now us having this conversation, knowing what it means, right? We could say, okay, it really doesn't mean, I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but it is being parroted. It is being shared, and after years and years of doing that, it gets into the American vocabulary. Then everybody's Latinx. So and that's my concern, that there's a large swath of people that do not identify with that term because of how it was created and where it came from, and now you're pushing that upon a whole group of people and that disagree with that term. And quite frankly, I know a lot of people in my circles, and they're young. Some of them are younger, some of them are older, clearly, that disagree with the term, and they're offended that you would call them Latinx when they understand the origins of the term. And I think that is not fair. It's not equitable. So I think that it's just, again, for a sub, and you don't like this word, I know, like Daniel said it as well, a subgroup of people, a subculture, the way I identify it. I think this is a great discussion. I think that clearly we have passions on both sides on this issue. I think that we had a good dialogue here, talking about the pros and cons, inclusivity and exclusions, and broad terms, and should it be applied to everybody? We agree, we disagree. I don't know where it's going to go. I'd like to believe, Mark, personally, that it's going to go away, but something else is going to come up. So right, I don't know if that'll be worse. That's at least my opinion. Last parting thoughts. I'll give you 1 minute to close. We'll start with Claudio, and then we'll go to Margarita, and we'll go to Hector, and then Mark, your final words, and Steve, if you got 1 minute, then we can wrap this up, okay?
I have learned from each and every one of you that what we're looking to do is to pursue a society that's fair, that treats each other with dignity and respect, and that wants to correct the damages that have been done for millennia. But I submit to each and every one of you that words are important. There is power in the word. Words are powerful. Bones and stick won't break my bones. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Words will break your bones. Words will change how societies perceive themselves and how we treat one another. And I am not defending the Latino word. That too shall pass. What I'm saying is to say that we need to call each other by a term that's non-gender specific in order to love and respect one another is a far deviation from truth. And we need to ask ourselves the basic question, is this good? Is this good for people? I believe with great conviction, it is very bad for all of us, including the ones that started this word, and they're entitled to have an agenda. I understand that. I respect an agenda, but I think we need to have the freedom to critique that agenda objectively. Thank you.
Margarita?
Thank you so very much once again, Gilbert, and thank you, Mark and Claudio and Stephen and all the panelists here. I think as Claudio said, words are very powerful. And to close my statement, because we have a few minutes left, Latinx should be a choice, is a choice. We have to respect it. As I wrote in our private chat, I think when any changes or any evolving issues concerning any anything in the language should not have a political agenda. We should reinforce and be united to help to improve our society and our community. And let's see if Latinx stays as the Spanglish or no. But once again, I love to be called Ecuadorian or Hispanic or Latina. I do not resent to be called Latinx, but if you call me, it won't, hurt me. But I will stand up myself and say why I shouldn't be called Latinx. And mostly we should be in the position to educate people around our community, so society will be more strong and more understanding about the terms that are coming in the future. So thank you for having me, Gilbert. Thank you, Mark. Interesting. And I was reading also the work that PEW does. So great. And thank you, Claudio.
So I am glad I was able to be a part of this conversation here, multiple perspectives. Every perspective, no matter what it is always valid, because the only way we reach a change in our community, or the only way we reach a point of consensus is through debate and hearing multiple perspectives. So I thank everybody for that. So it's about change. It's about change. It's about language changing. It's about caring about thy neighbor. It's about being there for each other, and it's about the individual. Nothing is ever forced. It's about the individual deciding who they want to be and how they would like to be identified. And then I'll end it with a quote from something that I read earlier today. The reason many people have opted to use Latinx instead of Latino is similar to why we say postal worker instead of mailman, because times are changing. Women are also are now working in the postal service. Times are changing. Women are also voting now. It used to be a tradition that women couldn't vote. Things have changed. Women can vote now. Life changes. We should accept change. And as Claudia was saying, we should always look to see what people's agenda are. And once we study people's agendas, we can understand what's behind their argument. So, and words are powerful, and I agree with that.
Great. Mark?
Well, first I want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. It's really great to hear everybody's perspectives and thoughts about the emergence of these pan-ethnic terms. The center will continue to do more work on this. At Pew Research, we'll continue to focus on identity for both the Latino population, but also the nation as a whole. And I would, say one thing that I think is very interesting about all of this is that these terms do come and go, and things will change. And there's, again, no guarantee that Latinx will rise in popularity, but I have a feeling that other terms similar to it might emerge that will be alternatives, like Latina. I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes popular in the United States as people begin to realize it can be pronounced easily in Spanish and can accommodate so much in both English and Spanish, which Latinx kind of can't do, but I think has maybe impacted some of its appeal. So we'll see how things go, but I do think that the nation and the world is changing, and what we're seeing with Latinx is not unique. It's happening around the world in other countries where Spanish isn't even the dominant language.
Thanks, Mark. Stephen, parting words, and I'll wrap up.
Yes, thank you for letting me join. I think I'll just go ahead and express again. I'm not sure if you caught me at the end, but basically from what my experience has been with the word Latino, especially seeing, growing up and all that, is that it was already an inclusive term. Now, if people want to, first of all, Latino, Latina, that again comes from the masculine and feminine terms in how Spanish is spoken. So it wasn't about, or at least we haven't used it to separate or make it a chauvinist term or anything, because it's inclusive of everyone. Now, the second part is with the word LatinX, right? That has come up to be very divisive. That term is divisive because right now, when someone says and Latinx, right? If here's a group of people who are Latinx, all of a sudden you have to start thinking, oh, it's not Latinos, it's Latinx. So who over there is LGBT? Who over there is a Black? Who over there is a Latino? Well, not Latino, right? Latinx. So now it does become a very divisive term where it makes everyone into their own little silos of where they might be. So that to me, if it's a term about inclusivity, that's the wrong term, and especially when you start trying to do that when we already had something.
Gotcha. Stephen, thanks so much for sharing your words. Listen, parting words, thank you to the panelists. Daniel Viotto, I know he had to leave early, but I'm glad he was able to attend as well, and everybody who took time out to be part of this important discussion. We'll have more discussions like this, and I'll be more than happy to invite panelists back and have another one on another topic. Thanks so much. This will be on the web and recorded. Until next time, guys. Adios.
Gracias.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.